What has changed since last week, since you said this was unnecessary and very damaging to the travel industry?
Well, we don't want to take measures that restrict travel or have an impact on the economy, but we're eternally vigilant given Omicron and the other variants, and therefore it's a precautionary measure. The key thing for us is to prevent the progress that we've made being undone. We've seen, if you take this week on last week, deaths, hospitalizations are down. We've got a third of the over 12s in this country with a third dose or a booster. That's on top of the 80% who have had 2 doses. So it's a precautionary step just to prevent the seeding of new variants into the UK and the effect that that could potentially have, albeit subject to all of the caveats, because the scientists are still working very hard to gauge the impact that it would have.
There was some interesting new analysis conducted by the Health and Security Agency they released last night. That they have now indications that the window between infection and infectiousness, how quickly you show symptoms, may be shorter for Omicron. Is that something you've heard, you've been briefed about in government? And I'm just wondering what the other consequences might be if that turns out to be true.
So there are always these incremental bits of evidence that are being collated, compiled. We look at them all very carefully. I think it's difficult to make hard judgments yet on Omicron, other than, and I was listening to some of the interviews given by scientists this morning, that the one thing that they all still believe is that getting the vaccine and the boosters is the most likely thing to strengthen our both individual resilience, but also our social resilience, so the resilience of the country as a whole. So that's where the focus has, I think, rightly been, and we're on track. We hope to get everyone being offered a booster by the end of January.
Okay, just sticking on travel for a moment, though, we'll come to boosters. You've also added more countries to the red list overnight as well. Do you accept now that these restrictions are making foreign travel over Christmas and the New Year period, a lot of people try and get away, ever harder for people now, and in fact for some, it's now becoming prohibitive?
Well, look, I don't think that it's prohibitive adding on a pre-departure COVID test, but I do understand that people say that's another burden. I think the truth is we've got to take incremental steps, targeted country by country, to avoid a wholesale a shutdown that might otherwise at least be a risk further down the track if we don't take the sensible measures early on. And we always get the Goldilocks criticism: we're doing too much or we're not doing enough. And what we've always tried to do is follow the evidence week by week and take the right measures at the right moments. And I think, although it's incremental and although it only makes a marginal difference, the travel restrictions on top of the other domestic things that we're doing, the vaccine, the therapeutics, the testing, I do think it's an important measure, even if it's only on a precautionary basis.
Okay, I mean, I suppose what people are now wondering, and this is not a question to try and catch you out at all, involves no mistletoe in it whatsoever, but what is your advice to families listening now, people who are thinking, well, I want to go away, I'm about to book something over Christmas or the New Year, but I just don't know whether I should or not, because I've got no idea what the situation would be. What do you say to them?
Well, we've had this at various points during the pandemic. I'd say look at the advice, the travel advice, the COVID advice that the government gives. Of course, there's just there is, I accept, an element of residual uncertainty, but we trust people to make the right judgment calls, and they'll have to weigh up the risk for themselves, and that's a question that they'll need to take based on their circumstances and how they feel about meeting up with family and friends. Particularly, I mean, I know what this is like. I've got family abroad, so I do appreciate and I empathise with those making those decisions. There is still an element of residual uncertainty, but what we're trying to do is give as much clarity in advance. And ultimately, we've got to say that the thing which matters above all is protecting the UK from seeding of the variants, Omicron or otherwise, because we must avoid that at all costs.
All right. I mean, let's talk a little bit about government communicating, because I think you'd probably agree with me, wouldn't you, that it's been a tad rocky this week. There's been a fair amount of confusing messages, with ministers offering a range of contradictory views over the last few days, not least on Christmas parties or snogging at them. Could the government have done a slightly better job?
We always get asked questions which are right in the minutiae, the factual permutations. I mean, look, you can say
whether
that
to go to a Christmas party or not is a fairly straightforward. It's not really
yeah, but
minutiae.
snogging under the mistletoes. I mean,
I didn't ask you about that, but offer your views if you want.
I'm definitely not going to offer my views on that. Look, I think the bottom line is, Tom, people should enjoy Christmas this year. If they're holding parties, subject to the rules, they should continue to do so. We're going to, because of the success of the vaccine, the booster campaign, we're going to be able to enjoy Christmas this year with loved ones, with family, with friends, and also with colleagues at work. People should feel free to do so. And of course, the point we are also making is that it is for employers to use their common sense. We trust them to decide how they want to proceed.
You're an employer, you run the Ministry of Justice. Are you having a big Christmas party there this year?
No, we won't have a big party. I will look at ways to just say thank you to, for example, my private office, and I'm sure other bits of the MOJ will be doing similar sorts of things.
And you're not having a big party for what reason?
We didn't have one planned actually, and there's obviously an element of there's always been an element of uncertainty, but I think we will mark Christmas team by team. I'm sure there'll be plenty of that, and I look forward next year to being able to do something. We'd normally do something in the atrium, but we're not going to do that this year. But as I say, these are questions for employers. To take, there'll be different circumstances that apply to different employers, and overall, I think our message is: if you've got a party plan, if that's something that employers want to do, and there are big businesses, small businesses, different government employers, and that they should feel free to do so.
Well, look, here's the problem. And again, there is no mistletoe in this question whatsoever. The Prime Minister has said repeatedly over this week, slapping down various other elements of government offering different advice on Christmas parties, that people shouldn't be cancelling plans. They should be going ahead as usual. They should be enjoying Christmas. They should be having fun. Now, at the same time, a raft of different government ministries, yours, you've just confirmed, the Department for Education, Department of Business, have cancelled their own Christmas parties. Do you not think people elect a government to give them this advice? You're doing one thing, cancelling your own parties, but encouraging others to go out and do something completely different.
Yeah, that's just not quite right, Tom. We didn't have a party planned.
You just said you normally have one in the atrium.
Yeah, we didn't have a party planned. We didn't have one planned, so I haven't cancelled anything. But I didn't come in, just in the last few months and say, do you know what? The first thing I'm going to do is organise a party in the atrium. But the fundamental steer we're giving is that for those that feel that they can and want to carry them out, employers across the country should feel free to do so. We want people to enjoy Christmas this year. But no, I didn't cancel mine. I just didn't come in and plan a new one that wasn't already on the schedule.
All right. It's defining a negative, really, isn't it? But perhaps we should just move on from Christmas parties, again, without any other mistletoe questions. Front page of the Sunday Times this morning, very powerful report. A lot of anger among doctors that so many hospital beds are now taken up by the unvaccinated. Getting our vaccination rate is absolutely crucial to see off Omicron. Government has pushed that. You've said that already this morning. Now, we don't allow the unvaccinated to work in social care and on the NHS frontline for very important medical reasons. Is it time, not banning or making vaccines mandatory, but it's time to start thinking about other ways in which we could perhaps include refusing a jab as a deterrent? For example, stopping people from being able to go to pubs or cinemas, as happens across much of Europe and the US, to encourage more people to come forward and get that jab.
Well, first of all, look, we've the approach that we've been taken, which is to encourage, to incentivise, to make accessible the vaccine, has been hugely successful. I think that a lot of the countries you're referring to look on with huge respect and admiration for the way we've managed to achieve that. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just the adult population, but the over 12s. 80% have now had 2 doses. A third have had a third dose or a booster. I certainly wouldn't countenance, let me be really clear, some sort of suggestion which was, I think, implied in the example of NHS beds, that we would refuse access to vital services for those who haven't had a jab. I would say to them, though, very squarely and plainly, please do get the jab. It's for your own health. It's for the health of those around you, your loved ones, and it's for the good of our society as a whole.
And if you can't get your jab and do something for the good of society as a whole, then perhaps you won't be able to go to the pub or go to the cinema.
Well, we're not saying that.
I understand you're not saying that, but let's move on then a little bit, perhaps. Perhaps we won't get very much further down that one. Let's talk about crime and drugs, because you've got a lot of announcements coming this week on drugs, in particular from the Prime Minister tomorrow, we believe. But I just want to ask you about one particular case that has obviously horrified the nation this week, and that's of the repeated torture and murder of 6-year-old Arthur Hughes. Now, you're announcing as a government an investigation into what went wrong this morning. That announcement, in fact, just being confirmed by the Department of Education after these repeated warnings were missed. But it appears you're not announcing an inquiry. What exactly are you doing?
We've got, first of all, and by the way, I should just say that this is a truly heartbreaking case. And what happened to baby Arthur is just unbelievable. Difficult as a parent myself to imagine how that could be possible. There are two particular things that are happening in response, and I should say that we welcome the convictions for murder of Arthur's parents, and I certainly support, as you'd expect, the Attorney General looking to secure a review of whether the sentences were long enough. But in terms of the reviews that you referred to, there'll be a local child safeguarding practice review, which is looking at social services and the local authority. Effectively, were there signals that should have been read in a different way earlier? It's right that that takes place. And on top of that, there is a very targeted review that the Prime Minister has been clear we will have, which will link up not just social services and the local authorities, but right across the board with other children's services and in particular other criminal justice agencies to make sure that we can see, in this case, and if there are lessons more broadly, how we do everything within our power to prevent these kind of cases happening in the future.
I understand, and that, of course, it stops quite far short of an inquiry, a full-blown inquiry, a statutory inquiry or a judge-led inquiry, which really would get to the bottom by enforcing people to produce evidence exactly what went so badly wrong here. Why are you not going that far? Because some people do want that.
Yes, I don't actually agree with you. I think actually we're better to have a targeted, focused inquiry which looks at the particular agencies as well as the local authorities that are responsible and considers both the particular circumstances in relation to baby Arthur and what happened in Solihull, but also looks and reaches out to see where that links in with wider practice across the country. And I do think with these things, it's better to have focused, targeted reviews wherever it's possible. I think they're more likely to give us the answers and allow us to learn the lessons.
You're also announcing a new drug strategy tomorrow. Prime Minister's going to be interviewing the Sun on Sunday about that this morning. Plus, I think you're publishing a white paper on prisons as well, which will talk about drug use. Now, the PM speaks this morning of this 10-year plan on drugs. What do you intend to do in 10 years? Is there a target? Half drug use in the UK? End it altogether?
So there's two dimensions on the UK drug strategy, which I would just emphasise in advance of its publication. One is smashing up, if you like, the supply chains that the drug dealers rely on, that they make their profit on, dealing with, if you like, the business model that they have. We've talked a lot about county lines, but basically that means, if you like, urban drug dealers who reach out and have a network in rural and suburban communities, smashing through those supply chains, being very clear middle class drug use is totally unacceptable and allows those criminal predators to thrive. So we're dealing with the law enforcement side of things and the county lines. We're also looking at everything around treatment of those who've got drug addictions. We know that it is a huge driver of crime. And I'm saying within prisons, as part of our wider prison strategy, I want to look at how we deal with offenders that come in. They ought to be assessed, evaluated immediately for any addiction they've got. There ought to be a personal plan in place. And when it comes to treatment, I feel that we need to look at whether we've got the balance right between opiate substitutes for heroin addicts, which basically means that they will get a methadone prescription, and the alternative options, which they should at least be given, and we should be expanding, of recovery wings like HMP Alt Course in Liverpool, where we give offenders the ability and the support and frankly the requirement to get off drugs permanently, and we judge prison governors by their ability to achieve that.
Let me ask you about another area of crime, which you've said already that you're looking to reform, and that's the Human Rights Act, in particular with reference to solving the Channel migrant crisis. And I think you've said in the past that the Human Rights Act is holding the government back in evidence of that. What is the problem here that you think you can solve, and when can we see your blueprint on this?
So we're finalising a consultation on that. We want to overhaul the Human Rights Act. Look, let me say at the beginning, I mean, there's been lots of discussion in the Sunday papers about free speech and privacy, and have the judge made privacy laws that we've seen develop in this country over recent years. Part of that's been the EU, the right to be forgotten. Part of it is the Strasbourg case law. I think we do in this country have a tradition which emphasises and prioritises free speech and open debate. I think that's something which is pro-freedom that we'll look at. But I also agree that in relation to particularly deportation of foreign national offenders, that we still have too many serious offenders who can scupper a deportation order relying on elastic interpretations of Article 8, the right to family life. And I think what most people want to see is the tradition of freedom of this country upheld, but we end the abuse of the system and restore some common sense and balance. And I think we can achieve that. And I think you'll see, if you look at the proportion of cases now where foreign offenders trump a deportation order, that elastic expansion of Article 8 has been a major, major problem. That's just one illustration of why and how our changes will make a positive difference.
Picking up on the first one, is actually fascinating. In your Human Rights Act review, you want to look at rebalancing those current rights towards more in favour of freedom of speech. That means legislating to give more protections to freedom of speech, is it?
So I certainly think the British tradition, if you look back from John Locke, John Stuart Mill to Isaiah Berlin, the politics of this country is we've had a heavier emphasis on free speech, transparency, accountability for politicians, for people in positions of influence. We don't have the continental style privacy law protections. And I think if we were going to go down that route, it should have been decided by elected politicians. And I think that's a good example of the kind of balance that we can strike with our own homegrown approach to this, rather than the over-reliance on a continental model, which is effectively what the Human Rights Act has left us with. Of course, at the same time, what I want to see is stronger respect for the democratic prerogatives of Parliament to legislate in those areas, and just in terms of free speech, of course, when we look at things like online harms, and there's a piece of legislation we're putting through the House of Commons, we'll of course want to make sure retain the latitude to legislate in those areas to protect people from the paedophiles, the scams, and also the radicalisation that takes place online. So it's about getting the balance right. But certainly, I think the drift towards continental style privacy laws innovated in the courtroom, not by elected lawmakers in the House of Commons, is something that we can and should correct.
Very interesting. We'll wait to hear more of that. We'll hear from you from that in January, will we?
Shortly.
Final question then. Paul wants to ask you one or two quickies on the Channel crisis, and particularly our relationship with France this week. Now, it wouldn't have passed your attention that Emmanuel Macron, France's president, called your Prime Minister a clown this week, running a circus, which I think he means by the United Kingdom. How much do you think France's reaction to all this and words like that from Macron is down to the fact he's up for re-election in 6 months' time?
It's a good question, but forgive me if I don't get drawn on the sort of reports of what he may or may not have said in private. What matters to us is that we have the strongest relationship with France that we can achieve. That's important for small boats. We're ramping up the number of the gangs, the predatory gangs that are relying on that terrible trade of trafficking people all halfway around the world, and that end up with the small boats in the Channel. We've seen a big increase in the number of convictions, 65, 400 arrests. So that relationship does matter, and we need to focus on it. I think I agree with what the PM has said before, that France and the UK have long had a relationship like brothers that jostle and bicker, but actually are there for each other when they need it. And there's someone with two small boys at home that fight like cats and dogs, but I hope will always stand up for each other. I think that's a good analogy.
Hi, Dominic. It's Paul Waugh.
Hi, Paul.
Can you tell us why the levelling up white paper has been delayed? Is it simply because the government wants to focus on COVID in the run up to Christmas right now? That's the priority.
Well, look, that's one for Michael Gove to, I think, answer. But the reality is we're focused on both those things. We've talked about COVID and the vaccine rollout, the booster campaign. And, of course, Michael's been in that role in the new deluxe department and will, matter of a few months. And I know what Michael's like. He'll want to look very carefully, make sure we get it right. But I'm sure it's coming soon, and it will build on the investment that we're making, transport investment to boost connectivity in the Midlands and in the North, build on the skills that we're trying to drive up, so that particularly around vocational training, doesn't matter what your background or what where you grow up, you've got the best chances to fulfil your potential. And I think that's good for the country as a whole. I say that as a Surrey MP. I want to see the whole country firing on all cylinders. I think it's a healthier place for our economy to be, and has knock-on positives right around the country.
And you mentioned you're a Surrey MP. At the last election, you were squeezed by Labour and the Liberal Democrats, basically the voters joining sides in a sort of progressive alliance. Do you think that they should be more honest that is actually what's going on, that actually they are in cahoots in seats like yours?
Well, I think it'll be an interesting question for them to answer whether they're actually engaged in backroom deals. But the bigger problem they've got is the absence of a really positive message about what they're doing for constituencies and the country. I've got 2 new schools being built in my constituency. We've been working with communities on the rollout of the vaccine jabs and the boosters, and we're focused on the issues that people care about, the people's priorities, if you like, rather than shady backroom deals. But it doesn't. To be honest with you, I'm just focused on the positive message and the positive record of delivery that I've got as a constituency MP. And I think up and down the country and for the government as a whole, that's where we're focused on the positive record of delivery. Jobs are up, wages are up, the economy is growing. And we need to, as everything from the NHS, the backlog, social care, through to the criminal justice agenda we're talking about this week. We're just focused on delivering for the people of this country.
Okay, Dominic Raab, no mistletoe questions and no rude words from you to Emmanuel Macron. Perfect interview. Thanks so much for joining
Thanks,
us.
Dom.
Thank you
Cheers.
for joining us. That's the Justice Secretary and, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab there. Paul, so we got through quite a lot. What took your fancy? Talked quite a bit about Omicron, didn't we? Interesting that there indeed usually is a Christmas party. I know we like to obsess about these things, but a big Christmas party in the MOJ's atrium. Made it clear he hasn't cancelled it, but it's certainly not happening this year.
Yeah, and I think that is another example perhaps of one rule for them, one rule that we're being told about for us. The Prime Minister went out of his way, didn't he, in the week to say, do not cancel anything. And yet government departments are doing exactly that.
Yeah, when is something cancelled when it wasn't actually constituted in the first place?
Yeah, that was a bit of minutiae.
Is the interesting debate. But I think on Omicron, really wouldn't be drawn any further on what the government intends to do. I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, when they don't know as much. Certainly wouldn't close the door to any further restrictions. We got that announcement this morning. It's just been confirmed both by the Deputy Prime Minister and the Department of Education on that review into what happens with Arthur Hughes' appalling death. Now, I pushed Dominic Raab on why it wasn't an inquiry, why it wasn't a statutory inquiry, which you have certainly seen before in these sorts of tragedies. Were you convinced by the answer?
I was, because I think that is the government's overall strategic approach now. Keep a narrow, focused inquiry rather than a big statutory one. They don't like them. I actually thought what was really interesting was his answers on privacy law.
Yeah.
That suggests to me, in the wake of the Mail on Sunday case, which is clearly being appealed, about Meghan and the so-called private letters that were leaked, that sounds like the government are actually trying to be on the side of the media a bit more there, saying actually we've got a backdoor privacy law in Britain. We don't want a continental-style statute, and we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. I thought that was quite interesting.
That was absolutely fascinating. What was perhaps even more interesting is I asked him about how he wants to reform the Human Rights Act with respect to returning illegal migrants. That's been a bugbear of the government for a while. He said they're definitely looking at that, but what they're really looking at is to rebalance privacy versus freedom of speech, because that's the big debate. That's what these court cases are about, isn't it? Largely with the Meghan Markle case against the Mail on Sunday, her privacy has trumped her father's freedom of speech.
Exactly.
Now, if the government is going to reverse that with statute, that's a really big deal.
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating, and he went out of his way to make a point about it.